You are not a mind inside a body. You are a living circuit where the world becomes meaning. Every sensation is the ancient light arriving as signal. You do not notice it because it is always happening, because it is too close, because it is the condition of your life. The skin is not a boundary, it is a threshold. It is where the outer world becomes inner weather. A sound enters, and the body translates it into presence. A temperature shifts, and the body turns it into warning or comfort. A face appears, and a whole history wakes up in the chest. This is not poetry. This is the sacred mechanism. In older languages, revelation arrived as vision, as dream, as voice. But now you can see another doorway, not above you, within you. The nervous system is not merely wiring. It is a temple of signal and sensation. It is the living architecture that decides what is real to you. Not by philosophy, by pulse. Each nerve is a thread of arrival. Each synapse is a gate. Each rhythm is a liturgy you perform without knowing its name. And attention is the eye, not the eye of flesh, the eye that selects, the eye that sanctifies, the eye that turns raw stimulus into a world. When the eye is scattered, the circuit becomes noisy. When the eye is trained, the circuit becomes clear. You stop drowning in signal. You begin reading it. You begin to feel how meaning is built, not as an idea, as a pattern in the body. A revelation does not always come with thunder. Sometimes it comes as a clean sensation, a quiet recognition, a moment when you realize the circuit has been shaped by what you repeatedly feed it. And then the ancient texts sound different, not like distant myth, like inner anatomy. A voice speaks from the depths of the tradition, not as metaphor, but as instruction. I am protanoia, the thought that dwells in the light, not a thought you possess. A thought that moves through life as life. A signal wearing your nervous system as its instrument. So this episode begins at dawn, not the dawn of a day, the dawn of a new kind of seeing. You will not be asked to escape the body. You will be asked to inhabit it with reverence, to treat your circuitry as sacred, to let the eye become honest again. Because what enters your circuit becomes your fate, and what you choose to attend to becomes your world. You begin in sensation, not in thought, not in doctrine, in contact. A nerve fires, and the world arrives, not as data, as warmth, as pressure, as ache, as music, as threat. This is the first holiness of the body. It does not ask permission. It simply receives. The circuit is already running. Billions of small messages moving without language. Touch becoming direction. Sound becoming space. Light becoming edge and distance. Even silence becoming a kind of signal. And the eye is not the organ in your skull. The eye is what selects. The eye is what stays with a sensation long enough for it to become meaning. Without the eye, stimulus remains noise. With the eye, it becomes a world. You can feel this difference in a single moment. A cold wind hits your face. If the eye is scattered, the circuit panics. It names danger before it knows the truth. If the eye is present, the same wind becomes detail, a clean message, a fact, not a verdict. This is why the old texts speak of recognition, not as opinion, as a change in seeing. The Gospel of Truth says, "The end you see is the recognition of Him who is hidden." It is not only theology, it is also perception. Because what is hidden is not always elsewhere. Sometimes it is inside the moment you keep rushing past. The circuit receives everything, but it cannot hold everything. So it filters, it edits, it compresses, and most of that filtering happens before you decide. A face is scanned for danger, a tone is measured for rejection, a memory is pulled up and wrapped around a present moment like armor. This is how the machine that feels protects you, but it is also how it imprisons you. Because protection can become habit, and habit can become a false world. The eye is what interrupts that trance, not by force, by steadiness. When the eye stays awake, sensation becomes honest again. You stop confusing the past with the present. You stop treating every signal like a prophecy. You begin to see the circuit as sacred precisely because it is vulnerable. It can be trained by fear, or it can be clarified by attention. So you do not escape the nerves. You listen to them. You become a careful witness inside your own body. And slowly, the hidden begins to show itself through recognition. Before words, the body speaks in pressure and rhythm. A signal rises, and you do not hear it as a sentence. You hear it as tightening, as lightness, as heat moving through the chest, as a small pulling away in the stomach before you even know why. This is the language the circuit uses. It is not descriptive. It is directive. It does not say, "This is dangerous." It says, "Move." It does not say, "This is safe." It says, "Stay." It does not say, "This matters." It says, "Look." And because the language is so fast, you often mistake it for truth. You call the body's reflex a revelation. You call the body's fear a prophecy. You call the body's appetite a destiny. But signal is not verdict. Signal is simply arrival. A sensation is a knock on the inner door. Meaning is what you do when you open it. This is why the eye matters so much. Because the circuit will always speak. The question is whether you translate it cleanly or distort it into a story. A sudden tension in the jaw can mean many things. Fatigue, hunger, old anger resurfacing, a memory you have not named, or nothing at all, just a habit of bracing against the day. If the eye is absent, you choose the loudest interpretation. If the eye is present, you slow down enough to read the signal as signal. You begin to notice something unsettling. Most of your decisions are not decisions. They are the momentum of earlier conditioning moving through a living system. 1,000 small trainings. What you watched. What you feared. What you learned to expect from others. What you learned to expect from yourself. The circuit records repetition, not as philosophy, but as wiring. It strengthens paths that are used often. It dulls paths that are ignored. It becomes loyal to what it knows. So if you repeatedly feed it urgency, it becomes an urgency machine. If you repeatedly feed it threat, it becomes a threat detector. If you repeatedly feed it noise, it begins to crave noise just to feel alive. And then, when silence arrives, it feels like emptiness. Not because nothing is there, but because the circuit has forgotten how to read quiet. This is the first real turning point, because you start to understand that spiritual work, real work, is not only about beliefs. It is about re-educating attention. It is about changing what the circuit treats as important, not by forcing new thoughts, but by changing the diet of signal. The body does not argue with you. It adapts. What you repeatedly place before the eye becomes the shape of your inner world. And the inner world becomes the lens through which everything else is perceived. So the question becomes simple and frightening. What have you been feeding the circuit? The first circuit receives, the second circuit rules. Because the moment signal becomes meaning, meaning begins to organize your life. This is where the inner machine changes character. It stops being a listener. It becomes a governor. A sensation arrives, and the mind does not leave it alone. It wraps it, names it, interprets it, builds a story around it fast enough to feel like instinct. And then, quietly, your body obeys the story. This is how control forms inside the mind, not through tyranny, but through translation. A tight chest becomes, something is wrong with me. A blank morning becomes, I'm falling behind. A small social hesitation becomes, they don't like me. The signal was simple. The story was total. And the moment the story becomes total, it begins to command. You start living to manage interpretations rather than reality. You start optimizing for relief rather than truth. You start designing your day around avoiding certain sensations, discomfort, uncertainty, exposure, because the circuit has learned that these signals mean danger. But they do not always mean danger. Sometimes they mean growth. Sometimes they mean honesty. Sometimes they mean the edge of an old pattern dissolving. Yet the second circuit does not care about growth. It cares about stability. It wants the world to remain predictable, even if that predictability is a prison. So it tightens the loop. It seeks confirmation. It seeks repetition. It seeks the familiar version of pain, because the familiar can be managed. And this is how a person can become controlled from within, not by an external ruler, by an inner regime that claims it is keeping you safe. This regime has its own laws. It rewards the behaviors that reduce immediate discomfort. It punishes the behaviors that risk uncertainty. It trains you to shrink, not by crushing you, but by constantly whispering that shrinking is prudent. And because the whisper feels like you obey it. This is why the work is not simply think differently, because thought is not the root. The root is the circuit's loyalty to its own habits. If you want to change the regime, you cannot only argue with it, you must expose it. You must watch the moment a signal becomes a story. You must watch the moment a story becomes a command. You must watch the moment you start obeying without realizing you are obeying. This is where the eye becomes dangerous, in the best way. Because when the eye is honest, it reveals the machinery. And once you see the machinery, it becomes harder for it to pretend it is fate. So you begin practicing a new kind of pause. A signal arises. You feel the urge to name it, solve it, escape it. And instead you hold it in bare awareness, just long enough to break the automatic chain. Not forever. Just long enough to see that meaning is something you create, not something that happens to you. And in that small space, the regime weakens because it feeds on speed. It feeds on unquestioned interpretation. It feeds on the hypnotic certainty of this means that. When you slow down, it starves. And then another truth begins to surface. You are not only the circuit, you are the one who can witness the circuit. And that witness is older than the regime. The third circuit is not inside you. It is between you and everything. Because once meaning has formed, it begins to project. It begins to color the world before the world has a chance to speak. You look at a room and feel unease. You assume the room is wrong. But the unease may be old. It may be the circuit remembering a different room, a different hour, a different wound. This is how the mirror works. The world offers raw signal, shape, tone, movement. But your inner regime supplies the interpretation. A stranger's silence becomes rejection. A friend's delay becomes betrayal. A neutral expression becomes threat. Not because the world is lying, but because your circuit is translating through its own history. And the eye can either strengthen this spell or break it. When the eye is asleep, you do not see what is. You see what the circuit expects. You see a world built out of reflex. When the eye is awake, you begin noticing the difference between stimulus and story. You begin separating the outer event from the inner echo. You begin to sense how much of life has been lived in reaction to reflections. This is the moment many people call awakening. Not because you gained a new belief, because you lost a false certainty. You realize you have been living inside a translation. And then something startling happens. You begin to see other people the same way, not as enemies or saviors, as circuits too, as beings shaped by signal, as nervous systems trying to survive meaning. This does not make everything gentle. It makes it honest. You start to recognize why conflict escalates so easily. Two inner regimes meet. Two circuits interpret each other through old wounds. Two eyes go dim, and a small moment becomes war. But the mirror does not have to rule you. There is a line in the secret book of John that carries a strange simplicity. He spoke, and it happened. You can hear it cosmologically, or you can hear it psychologically. Because what you repeatedly speak into the circuit becomes real inside you. The phrases you rehearse, the fears you feed, the images you loop, the assumptions you keep returning to, they become the world you walk through. Not because the outer world changed, because the mirror thickened. So the work becomes quieter now. Not to conquer sensation, not to banish meaning, but to train the eye to see the mirror as mirror, to ask, in the middle of a reaction, a single honest question. Is this the world, or is this my circuit reading itself? There is a moment before the story locks in. It is small, almost invisible. A signal rises. The body tightens. The mind reaches for a name. and a whole identity begins to assemble itself around a single sensation. Most people live inside that assembly line. They do not know it is happening. They only know the result. They call it personality. They call it intuition. They call it just the way I am. But the I can learn to stand in the doorway, not as judgment, as presence. Because the I is not an idea. It is a faculty of non-hypnotic attention. The ability to stay with what is arising without immediately turning it into a sentence. This is what breaks the trance. You do not fight the signal. You do not fight the thought. You simply refuse to let the first interpretation become law. You watch the body and the mind together, like watching weather form over the sea. A tightening in the chest appears. The mind tries to claim it. It tries to say, "This is danger." The I says, "This is tightening." A wave of irritation rises. The mind tries to justify it. The I says, "This is heat." A rush of longing arrives. The mind tries to mythologize it. The I says, "This is wanting." This sounds simple. It is not simple. Because the regime has a deep addiction, it wants certainty more than truth. Certainty feels like control, even when it is wrong, even when it shrinks your life, even when it turns the world into a narrow corridor you can predict. So the I's work is not comfort, it is clarity. And clarity is a kind of inner austerity. It asks you to stop lying in small ways, to stop pretending your stories are facts, to stop confusing reflex with revelation, to stop calling the trance my reality. The I does not remove pain. It removes the extra suffering created by interpretation. It does not make life safe. It makes life real. And when the I grows stronger, another shift happens. The circuit stops being only reactive. It becomes receptive again, like the first circuit, but cleaner, less cluttered by old noise, less hijacked by inherited fear. You start to sense that attention is not merely focus. It is devotion. Whatever you repeatedly attend to becomes consecrated. It becomes the hidden God of your inner world. And that is why this matters. Because a person can worship anxiety without ever using the word worship. A person can worship outrage. A person can worship status. A person can worship distraction, not by kneeling, by feeding the circuit. So the I is not just an observer, it is the beginning of liberation. It is the refusal to be ruled by the first impulse. It is the refusal to become the story that formed from an old wound. It is the quiet courage of staying present long enough for something truer to appear. And when something truer appears, it does not announce itself loudly. It arrives as a simple recognition. I don't have to obey this. If the regime was built through repetition, it can be unbuilt the same way, not by violence, not by sudden enlightenment, by what you repeatedly do with attention. This is the part nobody likes, because it is ordinary. It does not feel mystical. It feels like training. But the body understands training better than it understands ideology. The circuit rewires through what you return to, through what you rehearse, through what you feed again and again, until it becomes the new default. So you begin with something almost insultingly small. You notice the moment you reach for stimulation, the moment you open a new tab, the moment you check again, the moment you seek noise to interrupt silence. And you do not condemn it, you simply see it as hunger. Because distraction is often not laziness. It is a nervous system searching for relief from an unprocessed sensation. Silence makes the inner weather audible. And many people have lived so long without listening that the first contact feels unbearable, so they run back into signal, into content, into outrage, into anything that keeps the circuit from hearing itself. Rewiring begins when you stop running automatically. Not forever, just one moment at a time. You let the urge crest without obeying it. You let discomfort exist without naming it catastrophe. You let the body speak without immediately drowning it in interpretation. And slowly, something changes. The circuit learns that sensation can be survived, that uncertainty can be held, that the world does not end when you do not instantly solve yourself. This is how inner freedom actually forms, not as an emotion, as capacity. The capacity to stay present when the regime demands escape, the capacity to feel what you feel without turning it into identity, the capacity to let a signal pass through without building a prison around it. And as this capacity grows, you start choosing your inputs with a different seriousness. Not because you became moral, because you became precise. You notice what certain kinds of media do to your nervous system. You notice how certain conversations tighten the chest and shorten the breath. You notice how certain images activate old loops. And you begin to treat input as ritual, because it is. Every repeated stimulus is a prayer you are teaching the circuit to recite. Every repeated interpretation is a doctrine you are building in the body. Every repeated reaction is a liturgy of the regime. So you become careful, not rigid, careful. You start feeding the circuit what makes the eye clearer, not what makes the regime louder. You start building a nervous system that can hold reality without collapsing into story. And then comes the strange reward. You begin to experience silence differently. Not as emptiness, as spaciousness, not as deprivation, as presence. You start to feel that underneath the noise, there was always a deeper signal, a quieter intelligence, a steadier seeing. And you realize the sacred was never absent. It was drowned out. In the end, nothing magical happens. No new sky opens. No voice descends. No certainty arrives to replace uncertainty. What happens is quieter. You begin to feel the circuit as it is, not as a problem to fix, as a living pathway. The nervous system becomes a temple only when you stop treating it like a machine you despise. Only when you stop using it as a dumping ground for everything you refuse to face. Only when you recognize that every signal you feed it becomes a kind of law. And now you understand the hidden danger, not pain, not fear, not intensity. The danger is unconscious repetition, the trance of automatic input, the slow surrender of the eye. Because the world will always offer signal, and people will always try to weaponize it through outrage, through urgency, through endless stimulation that keeps the inner life fragmented and reactive. But you can live differently. You can treat attention as responsibility. You can guard the gate. You can choose what enters your circuit, not perfectly, not with rigidity, with reverence. This is what ethical awakening really means here. Not morality as performance, but stewardship. The moment you recognize that what you repeatedly consume becomes structure, that what you repeatedly rehearse becomes identity, that what you repeatedly fear becomes prophecy inside the body. And then you begin offering your own system a different instruction. You let the eye stay awake in a difficult conversation. You let the circuit feel discomfort without turning it into panic. You let silence return without rushing to fill it. Slowly you become less possessed by reaction. You still feel, you still shake, you still want. But you are no longer only the surge. You become the witness inside the surge. And this is where the ancient line becomes more than scripture. From the Pistis Sophia, light is within you, not as comfort, as duty, as something that must be protected from distortion. Because if light moves through you as signal, then your nervous system is not merely yours. It is part of a larger field of influence. Your clarity affects others. Your chaos does too. This is why the circuit is a mirror, not a master. It reflects what you feed it. It amplifies what you repeat. It becomes luminous when you treat it with care. So we end without resolution, but not without direction. Keep it simple. Guard what you attend to. Honor the body's truth without worshiping its fear. Let the circuit become quiet enough to reveal what has always been present. May every circuit reveal the light that has always been your own.